Hi friends, welcome to this week's episode of Wishful Thinking. So, before we get into this week's topic, I have a little announcement. I got new glasses. I'm just kidding. Well, I did get new glasses, but that's not the actual announcement. I have been reflecting on the quality of this podcast. We are 4 episodes in, and while it's been great to rip off the band-aid of starting a podcast and yapping in front of a camera for 30 to 45, 50 minutes, at the same time, I feel that the quality of this podcast could be a lot better. I want to be a lot more intentional with my words, I guess, or just the direction of my podcast. I feel like a lot of the time when I'm on here, I am just yapping. I have a topic in mind, but I don't necessarily do any preparation for each podcast episode. I do some brainstorming of things that I would like to talk about or touch on, but I don't have a clear direction for each podcast episode. And so we are changing that today and going forward with a journal. This is a random journal that I've kind of had since I turned 20. I decorated this journal for my 20th birthday, and I was like, this is my birthday. This is my journal of my 20s. I don't know. I have a lot of other journals, but this is my journal of random bullshit. I have life goals. I have, what else do I have in here? Past video ideas that I had never posted. I don't know. There's just a bunch of random stuff in here. But now this journal is going to become my podcast journal. So I have notes for this week's episode in here of what my talking points are so that we can have a direction. I don't want to script my podcast episodes at all. I feel like that's first of all, way too much work. And second of all, I just feel that I would be so much more authentic talking from whatever comes out of my brain. But I do want to have a direction, like I said, and also just make sure I do touch on the points that I want to touch on and don't forget anything that I think is important to note. Also, we have a podcast drink. We have a drink of the pod. It's a berry, tropical fruit, banana protein shake smoothie. So yum. I love smoothies so much. I could drink smoothies every single day of my life. But I feel a little bit obnoxious making smoothies because why do blenders have to be so loud? But I love smoothies so much. And smoothies are one of the only things that I feel that I can make better at home. I feel so wasteful anytime I buy a smoothie out, which is not very often because I feel like my home smoothies are always so much better. Let me know if you guys want the recipe for my smoothie because I swear it's bust. I've recently evolved it because I started using protein shake in it. I used to just use milk and put some sweetener in it, but now I use a Nuri protein shake, which is my favorite protein shake. I haven't tried a lot, but it's my favorite. And it just adds the perfect amount of sweetness and also protein. There's protein in here. But oh my goodness, so freaking good. Anyways, so let's just get right into it. As you guys could read from the title of this video, I am asking the question, why is OnlyFans becoming so prevalent in the media? And I have two very specific show examples that I want to touch on, but if there's any others, I would love to hear you guys talk about them in the comments below. If there are any others, I don't really know. I feel like I watch a good amount of TV, but there's definitely a lot of show blind spots that I possibly have. So if there's any other examples, I know there's also other shows and movies that depict actual sex work. I'm not saying that OnlyFans isn't sex work, but as we get into it, it is a little bit more nuanced than other avenues of sex work related things. Also, I wanted to say I tried filming this episode 3 separate times, and every single time something different happened, something different was an issue, but I feel good today. I feel like today is the day to film this podcast episode because I have my notes prepared, and also it's a cloudy day outside, which normally not my favorite thing. Actually, it's pretty nice, but it's not blazing hot. So my two show examples, which I want to give a spoiler warning for as well, because obviously I'm going to be talking a little bit about the plots here and maybe doing some major spoilers. The two shows are Euphoria, specifically the most recent season, and Margo's Got Money Troubles. So if you haven't seen either of those shows and you want to, pause here, watch them, and then come back. But I highly recommend watching Margo's Got Money Troubles. Euphoria season 3, you could pass. I'm not. This is my review. You can pass on Euphoria season 3. I highly recommend watching the first season of Euphoria, though. I don't remember what happened in the second one. But the first season was like obviously the reason the show got so popular, the aesthetic, the music. It's just iconic. But the third season, you can skip on it. You can skip on it. But Margo's Got Money Troubles was a hidden gem for me. It's on Apple TV, but you can find it other places, you know? And it's a really good show. It touches on a lot of like heavy topics. So if those type of things trigger you, the warnings that they give, you know, maybe refrain from watching. But I think it's a really great show. It put a lot of things into perspective for me, and I feel like it's one of those shows that for me I think about going forward, and like the show actually like changed my life and impacted me in a way that like, shifted my worldview. It was just really a really beautiful show, I think, and I believe there's going to be another season, so I'm really looking forward to that. But yes, so let's first get into it. Euphoria season 3. So yes, I will be talking specifically about the plot lines of these shows that pertain to OnlyFans. So I am not going to be explaining the other arcs of Euphoria, ruse, money, sex work, trouble. I don't even know what's going on with her, to be honest. I watched the whole show, but I was not locked in. Okay, I will not be talking about the other plot lines of the show. I will only talk about the ones pertaining to OnlyFans. And in Euphoria, it follows the character Cassie. She is, if you guys don't know, played by Sydney Sweeney. I think everyone knows. I think everyone knows that she's played by Sydney Sweeney. I personally just feel like Sydney Sweeney is so good in the role of Cassie because I just view her as Cassie in the real world. Like sometimes actors have roles where you're like, this is so spot on. I feel like this is you. I'm not saying everything Cassie does is Sydney Sweeney, but one of the main points of this show, I think, that they try to portray about Cassie's character is that she is someone who lives for the male gaze and is very male centered, which I definitely feel is almost a reflection of Sydney Sweeney. Do I know her personally? Absolutely not. But if you look at her recent films and movies that she's been in, for the most part, it's very sexually objectifying roles. Obviously, there are exceptions to this rule. Like she was recently in that boxing movie that no one watched. But everyone knows why they want to watch a Sydney Sweeney movie. And it's, I don't know. Everyone knows why, and she has just really catered her career to the male gaze, I will say. So that's why I think that. Anyways, let's just get into the actual plot. So Cassie is married or getting married to Nate Jacobs, which is really crazy to me. I don't believe it. I don't believe that they're together to the point where they're getting married in the show. They had such a, I don't remember the relationship in the second season of Euphoria, but I don't believe it. I don't believe that they're together for that long to the point where they're getting married. It's so unbelievable to me because Cassie stole Maddie's man. Maddie and Nate were together, or they were off, but they were gonna get back together, and Cassie got with him, and it was really messy, and I felt like she was just doing it to, I don't know. Actually, I don't even want to try to get into Cassie's mind, but I don't believe that they're together. Anyways, she really wants to do OnlyFans. Or no, she really wants to do like online modeling, content create. I don't know. But Nate is like, nah, baby, like, I got you. Just be a stay-at-home wife. And there's a really freaky scene with her dressed up in a dog costume. I don't know. There's a lot of really interesting visuals in this show. Sam Levinson, please stay the fuck away from me because I don't like what goes on in your mind. And I can't believe I watched your show. All 3 seasons. But she basically wants to do this stuff online, but Nate's like, no, I got you, girl, like, whatever. And there's a whole thing about flowers. I'm not gonna get into it, but essentially, on their wedding day, Cassie finds out that Nate is in, I believe it was $1 million of debt to these people who helped him, like, fund his funeral home project. I don't know. He's trying to develop like a funeral home thing. And so he took out a loan, never paid it back. They live a very lavish life. They had a very lavish wedding. And it was a whole thing. They chopped off Nate's toes. One thing about Euphoria I love is the cinematography. There was a really funny scene on their wedding night where Cassie is, I think she got blood on her dress or something, and she's just sitting in the middle of the frame crying about how like she got blood on her wedding dress or how she got hurt, whatever. Meanwhile, Nate is like running for his life from these men who are like chasing him. Comical, so comical. So she's brought up the concept of doing online modeling to Nate before. He said no. Now he's fucked. He's in debt, and also his construction project is not moving forward because there was a rare flower on the land. I don't know. I don't know anything about construction, but also it just sounds so ridiculous. So anyways, now that they're in crippling debt, Nate agrees to Cassie doing OnlyFans, and she gets the help of her ex-best friend, Maddie. Shocking. But Maddie is a manager's assistant. And so she kind of has connections to like the Hollywood world and managing, and she's already tried to kind of work with an OnlyFans model, which they kind of like showed in the show. But anyways, yeah, they team up and Cassie starts an OnlyFans. That is essentially the premise of how Cassie got into doing sex work or doing OnlyFans. It was out of obviously financial necessity. She could have had other options, to be fair, but she kind of also really is the type of person to want fame and attention and that type of eyes on her. And so it kind of naturally, honestly, does make sense for her character to be in that world of OnlyFans. There's a lot of other stuff that goes on with the plot of Cassie's OnlyFans. I'll touch on it a little bit more as we go on, but now let's talk about Margo's got money troubles. So in the name of the show, the main character Margo has money troubles, and this is because crazy plot, totally uncommon. She gets knocked up by her professor. And it happens to be her first year of college, very early on into her academic career. And so it basically throws her life off the rails. Now, to be fair, she does choose to have this baby. It wasn't forced upon her. It was her personal choice. She was just like, maybe this baby could save me. Yeah, she decides to have this baby. She ends up dropping out of school or like pausing school for the moment. And once the baby finally comes, she loses her job because she doesn't have childcare for this kid. And then she's like, okay, I can't afford childcare because I don't have a job, and I can't get a job because I have a baby who no one can watch. So she's just in this predicament, and it naturally leads her to discovering OnlyFans, where she can work from home, make good money, and spend time with her baby. So it's the full package for her, honestly. It makes sense to me why she chose to do OnlyFans. The initial scene where it kind of like comes to her mind is she has her boob out and she like squirts milk, and she's like, oh, someone would pay to see that. And she's like, wait, people do pay to see this type of stuff. And then boom, she gets into her OnlyFans shenanigans. So I really like how the show progresses her sex work from minimal nudity and mainly just messaging men. And this is so funny to me. I love this, honestly. Men pay her to send her dick pics, and then she will compare those dick pics to what Pokemon they are, and she'll write it all out like very beautifully and explain why they are the Pokemon they are and what attacks they do and stuff like that. I love that, and I know men would eat that up, and it's so funny. I feel like if someone's not already doing that on OnlyFans, you guys need to get on that. Yes, I love how the show like progresses from her doing those type of stuff to what it gets to in the end, which I again will also talk about as we go forward. My favorite part about this show, I mean, there's so many good things about this show, but in regards to like the OnlyFans sex work plot, it really shows the journey of becoming a sex worker or accepting that you are a sex worker. Margo initially is like doing it for money, and she starts off very tame. Like she has some pictures of her boobs here and there, and then the messaging men stuff, and then it slowly ramps up. She starts working with these more experienced OnlyFans creators. Together they create little skits and they do dances on TikTok to promote their pages and like all this stuff. It gets very theatrical. The scale of it it scales up. She's in costumes and she becomes this whole big thing in the sex work industry or on OnlyFans, the platform. Obviously with the help of these like more experienced creators. But eventually they end the show, the very last scene of the first season, with her doing her vag debut. I didn't really touch on this for Cassie, but There was a conversation with her and Nate earlier on about her saying that she only wanted to show boob, like only frontal, no bottom nudity. And kind of the same thing with Margo. Initially, she didn't want to do it, but then with the help or the support of the other content creators, they were like, okay, but you could like really price that, like you can make good money from doing your very first vag debut. And so it kind of shows the journey of her accepting that she's a sex worker. There was a period of time where she would argue with her, I think it was her mom, about the fact that she was like, I'm not a sex worker, this is art, And honestly, I do think that what she was doing is art, but just because it's artistic doesn't mean it can't be sex work too. So there's a little bit of an internal battle or struggle with her, and I think the last scene very beautifully shows her almost accepting the fact that she's now a sex worker. Euphoria does not get that complex, and there's so many other things that they could have touched on when it came to the world of sex work. Obviously, there was a little bit of social stigma that both shows talk about, but very minimal that Euphoria touches on, but they don't explore the internal impact of doing online sex work. In the show Margo's Got Money Troubles, they beautifully do. They show the repercussions and all of the dirty, nasty stuff that you don't want to feel and experience when entering that world as a way to not glorify it. But Euphoria gets off on glorifying nasty, dirty things. You know what I mean? Like, that is the whole premise of the show. Initially, it was following high school students being addicts and doing fetish content online. Like, it's always been about that type of stuff, almost in a fetishy way. But now it feels like the show should have grounded itself more in reality, which I wouldn't say that the show was initially too far from reality, but what I'm trying to say is I feel like the show has always been a bit detached from reality due to the aesthetic, but I feel like the newest season, the third season, had the opportunity to feel more grounded in reality and make these characters feel more human, make them feel more real by exploring the heavy emotions and mental turmoil that can come with doing sex work. We don't see that and don't explore it in the show. It's very surface level. They just do it, they get the money, and their only internal conflicts or struggles of these characters is usually because of their personal relationships, which I feel like is very unrealistic. Cassie had so much opportunity to explore the impacts of being a sex worker like Margo does. But the show just doesn't do that. They don't care. They want to glorify sex work, okay? It's so clear. Everyone talks about how Sam Levinson is a fucking creep. And in the fact that he refuses to humanize the female characters that are doing sex work, it just perpetuates that. I think that Euphoria Season 3 has many faults, and particularly in the Cassie OnlyFans plotlines. Sam Levinson, it's all him to blame, to be fair. Like, the creators of Euphoria refuse to humanize female sex workers, and it's crazy. Because there was also another scene, which is, it's still sex work, but it's not OnlyFans. One of the main primary set locations of the third season of Euphoria is inside of a strip club, and there is this very graphic scene of one of the strippers getting sexually assaulted by multiple men. And while there was a moment of Rue, who works at this strip club, not as a stripper, that would be crazy. Rue as a stripper. Anyways, so there is a scene where she kind of talks to her about it because she saw it on a security footage, and the girl just brushed it off. There was no further follow-up on her mental experience. There was no follow-up on that character about, like, how she felt after that experience, her pain, her healing, recovery, whatever. There was just no follow-up. She brushed it off, and I get that you're in that industry, but if you want to have such a graphic, almost gory scene like that in a show, just casually thrown in, you shouldn't just, like, drop that plot line after just saying, like, oh, are you okay? Like, there is like, why are we only asking if she's okay? Why are we not following that character to see, like, how this mentally impacts her? She's a new stripper too, so I feel like there was so much opportunity to explore what it's like to first get into that industry. Like, there's just so many missed opportunities with Euphoria that just make the show seem so emotionally flat. despite the fact that the show has so many moments that try to despite the show having so many moments of like shock value, it's very emotionally flat. It falls so flat for me in that regard. I like when shows actually make me feel something, not just like shocking me with gory, disgusting scenes every 2 seconds. You know what I mean? So let's get back to our question of why. Why is OnlyFans so popular in the media? I can think of two main reasons. One being that these shows want to be relatable and they're just a reflection of the fact that we are in a terrible economy. I'm not the first person to say it, but the job market is terrible. Minimum wage is not a living wage. I'm constantly hearing about jobs like cutting off and firing whole departments of people because of AI. But beyond that, like people can just not make a living wage, and most people I think nowadays work multiple jobs or have a side hustle. And so this trend in media is just a reflection of the fact that the economy is terrible and people have to resort to doing undesirable work. And even these very conventionally attractive characters, both Margo and Cassie, are like blonde hair white women. Both Margo and Cassie are like very stereotypically attractive blonde white women, and yet they are still struggling in this economy. Now, granted, I would argue Cassie does not try to get a real job. She straight goes to OnlyFans, but she knows it's an option for her. These women know that their bodies are a commodity that can be bought and purchased and paid. These women know that their bodies are a commodity that are profitable, and so they are just taking advantage of that opportunity in these tumultuous times. Yeah, I also kind of touched on like the idea of hustle culture is definitely something that kind of the idea of hustle culture, people having all of these side hustles. While in these shows, OnlyFans is not a side hustle, it is their main hustle. It is a common experience for a lot of people to maybe do OnlyFans or sex work or other types of jobs to make up a lack in their income. Overall, these shows are just a reflection of the societal struggles of people experiencing late stage capitalism. It's not normal to live like this, but it's the time, people are trying to survive and live in times like these, and you got to make do with what you got. And a lot of beautiful women have their bodies to sell. And so I think another part of why specifically OnlyFans is so prevalent in media is the fact that it's entertaining to see women's bodies. Hollywood just loves sexualizing women. It's not something new at all. This has been happening for like decades, maybe even a century plus. And so that is why it's also good media or like entertaining media for a lot of people to see women doing sex work, because it's relatable to their struggles and experiences, but also entertaining to see and even arousing for some. But I will say it's very interesting, and it really highlights the fact that it is about showing and highlighting women's bodies, not necessarily glorifying the experience as well, which I think is good. Mario's Got Many Troubles, I would say, doesn't glorify sex work. Euphoria season 3 kind of does, and so both of these shows kind of contrast in that way. But I also had a thought. It's really interesting. Other things that are considered hustle culture or like other ways to make money online, or I guess like physical work but online through an online medium like DoorDash and being an Uber driver. I have yet to see an example of that in like a show or movie, but they're so quick to make two different shows depicting women doing OnlyFans. Very interesting. I mean, I think that a show centering around a DoorDasher or an Uber driver would be so interesting, especially being an Uber driver. I always hear crazy stories about really interesting Uber drivers, but I'm sure Uber drivers have really interesting stories about the passengers in their car. Like, I would eat that show up, and it doesn't exist because even though it'd be entertaining, it doesn't commodify women's bodies. I mean, I think it could happen because not all media is centered around like objectifying women, but I think the reason that it hasn't happened yet is because of that. I wanted to compare and contrast the two shows on certain elements of them. I don't know, we'll get into it, but I wanted to like highlight, I've already kind of touched on some ways that these shows are different and also similar. but I wanted to make a more like clear and concise list, I guess. I wanted to highlight on the similarities and differences between these two shows because I've kind of already touched on it before. One is the fact that Cassie and Margo both are going through financial struggle. I think that's a very like natural or like given thing when it comes to doing OnlyFans. Now, obviously, there is so many people who also do OnlyFans are already successful in their own right. I feel like I've heard about so many like online creators who are already doing well for themselves and know that there's a demand for them to like sell their bodies. They do it like for the one time and then they make bank and never have to do it again. So I feel like there's different tiers, I guess, to doing OnlyFans and different reasons why. But I feel like for the average person who starts OnlyFans and is not like a top 10, top 1% creator, it's usually out of financial struggle and maybe even necessity. And so both of these shows kind of reflect that. Now, obviously, Cassie has a very lavish life that she lives previously, but that illusion is lost when she finds out about the $1 million of debt. And so, again, she also experiences financial trouble. Maybe not as much as Margo, but she does. Oh, I also talked about how both shows depict sex work very differently. Cassie kind of just does it and it's like no chip off her shoulder. It's almost like she wants the like fame and attention and all that stuff. Whereas Margo wants a more anonymous identity. She actually calls herself the Hungry Ghost, which is such a interesting name. But yeah, I touched on how she went through a whole journey of accepting that she's a sex worker. I don't know if Cassie considers herself a sex worker or not. You know what I mean? She probably does. Maybe she doesn't care. They don't talk about the nuances of whether or not you're actually doing sex work when you're doing OnlyFans. You know, I think that there are nuances to this. I think blanketly, like overall, OnlyFans is a sex work platform. But there are nuances. Like I said, some people don't. Like, I would argue that Margo's initial entrance into the world of OnlyFans isn't fully sex work. Like, is posting your boobs online sex work, or are you just posting your boobs? Like, free the nip, you know? But what I think when it gets more complex and into these more, like, interesting, intimate scenes with the more veteran creators, then it dives into more sex work. But the criticizing penis and posting boob, like, arguably not super sex work. I think that both shows depict sex work in a very different manner. One shows the struggle and the journey, the other just shows the quick money and the desire to be famous and have notoriety. But the other thing is that both shows, for the most part, do semi-nude, which is like mostly just showing frontal boob area. There was a conversation earlier in the show when Cassie's initially doing sex work up to Nate, where he asks her like, "Are you only like gonna show your boobs?" Or I don't remember exactly what he says. It's been so long since I watched the shows, but she essentially clarifies like she's only gonna post boob, you know. And this was literally an actual conversation that happens in the show. So yeah, we address the fact that she's not doing like bottom half showing. And for Margo, the same thing. She, for the most part, is only showing. And for Margo, it's essentially the same thing for majority of the show. She's only doing frontal nudity until the last scene, like I mentioned, where she does her vag debut, which is another interesting trend to see between both shows, the amount of nudity that these characters are willing to do. Now, obviously, I know for television, the most you can show is your boobs, obviously, because otherwise, if you show anything else, it's like rated X. But I think it's interesting because there are so many ways to show or imply showing more, but the fact that both of these characters only show a certain amount it's interesting to note that there's like a trend between those two. Another important thing, which I think is almost crucial to doing sex work, or maybe not necessarily crucial, but crucial to these characters, is the fact that they have a social support system around them that actually help them with their content creation. For Cassie, she obviously has Maddie, who does all the managerial work and like sets her up with other people and like helps get her name out there. And Margo, she has her roommate who does all of her crazy costumes as we get further into her OnlyFans career. We have her dad who helps like stunt coordination with these crazy scenes. Like, I genuinely recommend the show. The way that they do sex work is so interesting because it's genuinely like cinema. But yeah, he coordinates stunt scenes because he was like an ex-wrestler. And then we have the more experienced veteran who's on OnlyFans, like I mentioned before, who kind of also help guide Margo way. So Margo has a huge support system around her, and she makes like this whole team, this whole production of her OnlyFans, which I think makes sense because of the scale of what she actually does for her creations or her content. Cassie is more just like does it from a modeling perspective, which actually kind of takes me into the differences. Cassie treats OnlyFans kind of like modeling, being like an Instagram model. You know, she just takes these pictures. I don't even know if she does anything video wise, but she just takes pictures in like these interesting outfits. And Margo treats this as a medium of art, a narrative storytelling. She does it with a lot more intentionality to tell a story, make a character, like have plot lines and all these other interesting things. She has a whole costume and production. Like, obviously she has this whole production team almost around her who are made up of her friends and family. But it's genuinely like so much more than just putting your body online and like looking good. You know, she does it in a very interesting way. And I think this is also a part of the reason why she struggles. This is also a part of the reason why Margo struggles to identify herself as a sex worker for such a long time. And in the show, she never officially does, but my interpretation is that the Vag debut, you know, implies that she's accepting that identity. But I think for such a long time, it makes sense when you consider the production value of her online content being so high and so produced and so story driven. It makes sense why she considers herself an artist and creating art and telling a story rather than a sex worker selling her body, because it is so much more than that. But I do think that she is also selling her body, and having one doesn't negate the other. And then I also mentioned that another key difference between these characters, which also kind of goes into their perception of their work, is that they go into sex work for different motivations. Obviously, they both have the financial need, but Cassie does OnlyFans for another reason, which is because she is fame hungry. She wants notoriety, she wants to be recognized, she wants all that comes with that world. And which also kind of goes into my point of where Euphoria does show the stigma of sex work. So, Cassie has a sister named Lexi who they low-key don't get along. They're very like polar opposites almost. And Lexi from the jump is kind of like, you're selling your body, like, you know, and that is kind of the only voice of reason. She's one of the only voices of reason in the show, which honestly, I think to a degree, she's a little bit pretentious, but she has a voice of reason in the show, and she's like, you're selling your body, that's not cool. Which, okay, I think it's a notable job to be a sex worker. I think that she's kind of being very dismissive and very disrespectful of like sex work as a whole. Maybe, yeah, you don't want your sister to do it, but if it's what she's doing, then I think you should be supportive. But she works, Lexi, as a director's assistant. I don't know, there's a lot of like assistanting in this show. But she works on this show called LA Nights. And Cassie manages to get an audition for this show as like an extra. And then in the scene where she's on set, she completely goes off script, rants about her crazy life, about how she's paying off her husband's debt, and she married into this and she didn't know. And like she just has a complete character breakdown almost on set when they're filming this scene. She goes off script, and surprisingly the writers love it, and they offer her be a reoccurring character instead of like a one-time role. And so Cassie gets really excited, and I don't remember if it's the director or I don't remember who told her, but they were like, okay, you can't have your OnlyFans if you want to be in the show. Like, you can't be an actor and do OnlyFans. Like, it's just not going to work. So Cassie, so impulsive, so quick to act, deletes her OnlyFans. This is one of like the most high intensity moments for her OnlyFans career, I guess, because she deletes it just out of the blue because she'd rather be an actor. She wants to be famous. And you're not going to get famous on OnlyFans. You're just going to get recognized by a lot of strange dudes. So she wants to be famous, and she's like, okay, she throws all of that progress and fame and whatever away that she actually did get. She actually did accrue an audience because Maddie brought her to this Hollywood party where she met this guy and, you know, whatever. But she threw that all away for this role that she got on LA Nights. But when the show producers get word of her being an OnlyFans creator, they completely drop her. And now she's screwed because she doesn't have an OnlyFans because she deleted it and she doesn't have the role. So she has nothing. Well, this whole scene, there's a lot of other elements to it as well. She eventually like starts up a new OnlyFans, I think, but she was frantically calling OnlyFans like, please, it was a mistake, please. It just kind of goes to show Cassie is doing this for the fame and not for the love of the game. I don't think anyone does OnlyFans for the love of I'm sure there are people, but she's not one of them. She's not doing this for the love of the game. She wants fame, and she sees it as a stepping stone to get there. When in reality, they also talk about the social stigma of Hollywood being very against sex work, and if you're a sex worker, you're not going to get this role. Ironically enough, the actor who plays Faye, Chloe Cherry, apparently she used to be an OnlyFans creator. I feel like people might have already known this, but I only found out in my research of this video. But that was really interesting to find out. And also interesting how the primary source of stigma that they choose to explore in this show is the stigma from Hollywood. When one of the reoccurring characters in the show, Chloe Cherry, Faye, she used to be an OnlyFans creator. So I think it's really interesting that that's the one point of stigma that they really choose to emphasize in Cassie's story. Meanwhile, they don't care about that stigma in this show. But I think that more goes to say about the culture of this show than Hollywood as a whole. But I think it's interesting that they choose to critique it. Anyways, so Margo's motivations, I would say, for doing this OnlyFans content work is her child. And it almost conflicts with her motivation of having this child or taking care of this child, because when her OnlyFans career blows up, they get viral. I think it was on TikTok. They do this dance and everyone starts doing it, and then they're like, oh my gosh, this girl does OnlyFans, and then boom, your identity gets leaked everywhere, and it's a whole thing, which I really appreciate, because this is when they kind of really highlight the social and societal stigma of being an OnlyFans content creator. She tries to go to this party with her friend. She's visiting from New York, and they go to this party together. And this is around the time when her video blows up. This is when her online world and her physical world really collide, because a bunch of people at this party start recognizing her, and it's obviously a very uncomfortable experience. She really feels the repercussions of doing sex work and not being accepted or almost being made fun of by other people around you. Also, because of this, she also gets into a custody battle with the baby daddy, the professor, because he's a mama's boy. And we find out that his family is very, very rich. Initially, she's asking this dude for childcare money because she gotta pay. He's the dad, and he gotta pay her childcare. But his family gets involved, and they just basically set up her child to be a trust fund baby, but that doesn't help her now, which is why she does the OnlyFans. But when they find out that she's doing this, they're like, this is not good for our family image, because they also find out that the professor knocked her up, and also he loses his family because he had a wife and kids, and anyways. But now they're in this custody battle, and obviously her work is a little bit questionable. It's a questionable environment to be raising a child in, for sure. And so that is her motivation of, taking care of her child almost conflicts with her job, but at the same time, it's the job that's paying for her child's needs and also allows her to spend more time with him. The whole custody battle is half the season. I'm not going to spoil how it turns out, because in case you've gone this far into the video and haven't watched it yet, I don't want to spoil, because it's honestly not super relevant. But and I'll just say she wins custody, but the dad gets to see his son every other weekend or something, which is pretty fair. I think he should see his kid. Overall, I think it's really interesting that both of these shows came out so close together also, which is another reason why they were both so fresh in my mind at the time. When I had this idea to make this episode so long ago, they were both fresh in my mind at the time, and they came out around the same time, which was so interesting. Obviously on different streaming services. They both had a core plot line revolving sex work and OnlyFans, and obviously, yes, there's so much other shows and media that depict sex work, but specifically OnlyFans. I think it's so interesting. Like, I wonder if OnlyFans is paying for this promotion right now, or like what's going on with that. It trickles down into social media and the way people interact with one another. I've seen more than a few TikTok videos of people being like, oh, how can I make quick money? Obviously, everyone wants quick money. Quick money is good. And I don't really think OnlyFans is necessarily quick money. I don't really know what the experience of having an OnlyFans is like. Obviously, I don't have one. And I could have researched that initially, but I wanted to talk specifically about the media aspect, and I don't want to compare it to the reality. But I do think the reality is that you won't find as quick of success as these characters do. If you have the social support system, that would be genuinely, honestly impressive, because I feel like so many people have a stigma against doing social work, have a social stigma against doing sex work, and to find like so many people around you that are that supportive of you to the point where they'll help you and support you with it, and actually also knowing the right connections, I think it was very unlikely. But if you have that head start and you're comfortable and willing to do it, then I guess go for it. But also, like, consider the social stigma and the repercussions of doing these things, because a lot of these shows, or Euphoria specifically, does not really talk as much about the repercussions of doing sex work. I was gonna say, I've seen it the effects of this trickling down into TikTok comment sections, because I've seen people posting like, how do I make quick money? And I'll see comments where people are like, I can't think of, with like OF capitalized, can't think of anything. I think it's a funny comment, but like, I don't know, why are we encouraging strangers to do sex work and OnlyFans and like all these things? Like, it's not, a job is a job and money is money, but I don't know, it's not something to just like consider doing lightly. You know what I mean? It should be like a hard decision to make. If you guys ever see me doing sex work and OnlyFans online, just know that I am down bad. But I probably will never do it, because I'm honestly I honestly hate seeing my body naked. I'm not insecure about my body, but and I look at myself in the mirror, I think everyone does, or most people do. I think it's a fairly normal thing to do. But if I have to look back at my body on camera, like in a video or picture, ooh, no, I can't. I cannot do it, okay? I've never taken a nude. Because I don't, like, maybe I have tried. I don't think I've tried. I don't know. It's just like, it just makes me uncomfortable. It genuinely makes me uncomfortable. Like, I'm not built for that, because I already don't like seeing my body. Like, in person, it's fine. I don't have a problem. I'm not insecure. But, like, something about being, like, in a digital medium, or, like, being, like, a static image, or, like, a video. I don't, like, oh my gosh, it makes me uncomfortable. And, like, good for the people who are comfortable enough with that. But, like, genuinely, I'm just, like, I don't need to, like, my body's always with me, so I don't need to, like, look back at that. And obviously, just not for me. So, actually, I'll probably never be that down bad. I'll probably choose to DoorDash. I feel like I'd love DoorDashing. I'm not gonna lie. I honestly should probably try it, because I'm actually quite unemployed this summer. Maybe I'll have a day where I try being a DoorDash driver. Maybe we'll have a podcast episode where I'm DoorDashing during it. I don't think that's a good idea, though. I shouldn't podcast and drive. It sounds like a really bad idea. That sounds like it should be illegal. So, anyways, thank you guys so much for watching this episode. I hope you guys enjoy, and I will see you guys next week. Also, I just saw Dragonfly, which is so cute, because I am in a summer camp. I'm a part of a summer camp, and my summer camp name is Dragonfly. So that was really cute and sweet to see. If you guys saw me distracted, it's because I was looking at Dragonfly. Anyways, okay. Love you guys so much. I think. I don't know. Do I love you guys? We're 4 episodes in. I can say that. Okay. Love you guys. Bye. Mwah. See you next week.